वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन जी तव्हां ब्रेक खां अॻु में ॻाल्हि कई त तव्हां वज़ीर आज़म साहब या नाणे वारे वज़ीर जी असीं ॻाल्हि कयूं या असीं पंहिंजी सिंध हुकूमत जी ॻाल्हि करे था वठूं त हू मौसमियाती तब्दीली जे लाइ मुसलसिल जेको आहे ॻाल्हि कंदा अचनि पिया त मौसमियाती तब्दीली वॾो चैलेंज आहे हिन वक़्तु पाकिस्तान जे लाइ ऐं हीउ बोर्ड बि जेको आहे उनजो नतीजो आहे यकीनन असीं पहिरियों बि हिन ते प्रोग्राम्स कंदा आया आहियूं पर असीं हिकु महिमान खे जेको आहे दावत ॾिनी आहे जेके अमेरिकन रिसर्चर आहिनि त उन्हनि जो जेको आहे हिन समूरी सूरत हाल ते छा एनालिसिस आहे ऐं हू छा जेको आहे पंहिंजे एक्सपर्टीज़ जे मुताबिक़ हिन समूरी सूरत हाल खे एनालाइज़ कनि था उन्हनि सां असीं वधीक ॻाल्हि ॿोल कंदासीं ऐं पुछंदासीं त हू इन शइ खे कीअं ॾिसनि पिया सो मूंसां गॾु वीडियो लिंक ते मौजूदु आहिनि प्रोफेसर गैब्रियल फिलिपैली जेकी अमेरिकन रिसर्चर आहिनि बायोजियो केमिस्ट आहिनि ऐं इन्वायरमेंटल एक्सपोजर्स टू कंटेमिनेंट्स हुजे या क्लाइमेट चेंज हुजे उन्हनि जा खोड़ रिसर्च पेपर्स पब्लिश थियल आहिनि ऐं ही जेके बि मुल्क आहिनि डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ जी असीं जेकॾहिं ॻाल्हि कयूं त हू हिते ईंदा आहिनि विज़िट कंदा आहिनि हितां जी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ सां बि एसोसिएटेड आहिनि एयर क्वालिटी ते कमु कनि पिया सो उन्हनि खां असीं पुछी पिया वठूं त छा एनालिसिस आहे उन्हनि जो हिन समूरी सूरत हाल ते सो hello professor thank you so much for your time thanks a lot so last time when we had discussion the situation was completely different we were discussing scarcity of water but professor this time Pakistan has had enough of water the torrential rains they have triggered a flood in the recent history of Pakistan they were immense which has washed away lots of villages as well lots of people they've been displaced as well so what's your analysis on the complete situation over here?
Yes, it can be confusing, right? Because as you said, sometimes there's been extreme heat waves and sometimes extreme floods. But both of those are actually predicted by the climate change that we're undergoing right now. We're seeing more consistent extremes in climate, which includes also extremes in drought and in precipitation. So yeah, the flooding is catastrophic. I've been witnessing it from afar, and we have, in a smaller subset here in the U.S., also experienced extreme flooding this summer, followed by extreme drought. So it's really this chaotic weather, which is very challenging for communities and countries to deal with.
Venezuela is facing floods. I was just going through some of the newspapers.
Yes, there's floods
so
all over. We've had tremendous floods in the
Pakistan. So we can say that it's not just only Pakistan, but several other countries are also facing it. Even if we say United States, there have been certain states which are facing floods, and not only this, but Indonesia, Sri Lanka. So is this all the result of climate change?
Excellent question. And I'm always cautious to think that everything is a result of climate change. What I can very confidently say is that all of these events are made worse by climate change. Climate change causes these atmospheric patterns, which cause these high pressure zones and low pressure zones to stay in the same area for an extended period of time.
I'm sorry to interfere. I was expecting you would say that this is the result of human actions, not the climate change.
Oh, it is.
It is?
It is, yes. Okay. But it's what we can predict is we're estimating that most of these floods and heat waves are made about 15 to 50% worse because of climate change. We've always had floods and droughts, but everything is made worse by human-produced climate change.
Okay, all right. So, coming back to my first question, the whole situation, do you think that this is the only problem of developing countries, poor countries, that whenever they are facing any kind of situation, so it gets worsened more? What is the reason behind it? Is it the infrastructure, the human actions? What things should they fix, or there is little awareness?
It's a huge challenge. It's not going to be easy. So let's do a simple comparison of the floods in the Midwestern part of the U.S. to the floods you experienced here in Pakistan. Midwestern part of the U.S., yes, we had some property damage, and yes, there were people who died, but the buildings, the structures in the cities are built in such a way to be more resilient to flooding. And we have controlled housing, right? In Pakistan, I think there's fewer controls over where villages are placed. So they're placed in very vulnerable areas, which now has become very clear.
Right. So you mean to say that most of the places over here are vulnerable. Even Pakistan itself is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. How do you see the contribution of developed countries, helping developed countries and helping developing countries or poor countries facing climate crisis?
There's no question that there's the responsibility there. And this has been stated in all of the climate accords as well, is that there's a strong responsibility. And that's because the developed countries are responsible for over half of the accumulated greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are now causing us harm, right? So it is our responsibility. And as part of that responsibility, there should be money supplied for the poorer countries, the less developed countries, so that they don't remain so vulnerable to climate change impact.
So how should developed countries be contributing when it comes to help? Should they be providing funds, money in the form of money or expert advisors? What should be there?
Both of those, right? I'm not a big fan of other governments building infrastructure in another country because they don't understand the context. But funds, certainly for infrastructure projects for what we call climate resilience, expertise from this country, right?
Okay.
And also, this is an opportunity to consider ways that Pakistan can quickly leap from their current dependency on, for example, on bad gasoline, which causes also air quality problems, to electric scooters and electric vehicles, to start making those quick transitions. That should be our assistance to countries like Pakistan.
Okay, so like what about the future? What are the future predictions now? Have we had enough of floods? Have we had enough of storms? Are we going to face or have more in the future?
Laila, I wish I could say that that we've had enough, but no, what I always tell people is that no matter how quickly we act on climate change, the climate that we're seeing now, the floods, the droughts, that is our new reality. It can only get worse.
So how should we adopt it? How should we get used to it? How should we prepare for it?
Well, first, by doing exactly what you're doing. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure the government keeps it seriously. Let's make sure that people understand their vulnerabilities and plan accordingly, right? It's across the entire society. Otherwise, we'll see a repeat of this in 10 years.
Okay. So like what kind of proactive approach should be there from the side of developing countries, by the way, to face climate crisis?
Perfect. So one example is a significant number of people that were displaced because of the flooding.
Okay.
That flooding is not going to happen every year in Pakistan, but that is going to happen more frequently, right? You can look at those areas that were displaced, those villages that were displaced, and do one of two things. You can either make sure that villages do not relocate in those vulnerable areas, or you make sure their structures are protective. They're protected from flooding. I mean, there's certainly simple ways to make buildings and roads less vulnerable to flooding.
Okay, so do you think there, like I mentioned it earlier as well, that there is, as you mentioned too, that we should discuss it, we should talk about climate change and the repercussions of it we are going to face in the future. My last question would be that what kind of resources and techniques should be there, which should be adopted to avoid such big disasters? I'm talking about poor countries.
Yes. First and foremost, let's not take these disasters as if they will never happen again. Yes, let's use them as a cautionary tale.
Right.
And in order for that to be used, you have to do exactly what you're doing now and what should be done more by the countries of the governments of some of these poor countries. Make it very clear to citizens that a lot of these events are made worse by climate, and we're not going to avoid them in the future. So let's use this lesson not to rebuild just like we did before, but to leapfrog, use better technologies, and maybe that's where Western countries can come to assistance. Better technologies for your energy infrastructure, your housing, and transportation. So I think I use these disasters as horrible events in time, which I understand, but it's ways to understand that this is going to be what I call the new climate abnormal. This is happening more and more frequently. So we can't just turn our heads and assume that we weathered this bad event.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. And I think if I summarize this discussion, you meant to say that disasters in the future will persist until or unless we are not going for the profound changes which should be make sure to meet. So thank you so much for your time, and तव्हां हमेशा असांखे जॉइन कंदा आहियो ऐं पंहिंजो एक्सपर्टीज़ जेको आहे असां सां शेयर कंदा आहियो। नाज़रीन, जेकॾहिं आउं निचोड़ कढां प्रोफेसर सां गुफ़्तगू जो, त हू इहो ई चवनि पिया त मौसमियाती तब्दीली हिकु हक़ीक़त आहे, ऐं जीअं आउं उन्हनि खां सवाल बि कयो, कि ट्रांसलेशन बि हले पई, त मां उन्हनि खां सवाल कयो त जेको आहे छा ही असांखे अञा फ्यूचर में बि अहिड़े क़िस्म जा डिज़ास्टर्स जेको आहे मिलण वञनि पिया त उन्हनि चयो त काश मां जेको आहे न चई सघां, पर ईअं न आहे। असांखे यूज़ टू थियणो पवंदो उन्हनि शयुनि खां, पंहिंजी तयारी ते जेको आहे वधि खां वधि तवजह ॾियणी पवंदी। सो बहरहाल ही हुयो अॼोको प्रोग्राम ऐं पंहिंजो फीडबैक ॾियणु न विसारींदा। मुलाक़ात थींदी ईंदड़ हफ़्ते। पंहिंजो तमामु घणो ख़्यालु रखंदा। अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।